It's Ron Brown with Tech for Seniors. Ethernet cables, the two things you need to know in 2021. Now you know the routine. If you like the video, please click the like, and we'd sure appreciate it if you'd subscribe. It really helps us the channel and I produce more videos. Thanks so much. Let's get on with Ethernet cables and the two things that you need to know in 2021. Now what you need to know is that the internet is getting faster. Let me explain where I live. I live in Comox, British Columbia, which is on an island off the coast of Canada on the west side. Now, we really call this the Shangri-La of Canada because it's so beautiful. We don't make it easy to get here. We charge you a lot of money to get on a ferry. You have to travel for an hour and a half on a ferry. You then get docked at a place called Nanaimo. Remember where they make the Nanaimo bars? Yes. And then you head north and you have to drive for another hour and a half to get to Comox, British Columbia. Now, unfortunately, there's about 80,000 people that live in our regional area who all like this area. So I wanted to set the pace for it being fairly rural. But let me tell you, when the technician connected my gigabit service for Shaw, our cable provider, 6 months ago, he told me that most of the connections now were all gigabit services because that's how they connected your television, not the old PVRs. So yes, it's very common for a big gigabit service now. I also, at the front of my house, TELUS, which is our major telephone company, many years ago had fiber optic cable for me at the front of my house, again providing a gigabit service. So I have two options from my house to get a gigabit service. One of my friends down the street, she works at a bank. She has a very important job. She actually has a gigabit service from both companies, Shaw and TELUS, into her house, and she has a redundant modem system so that it switches if one goes down or one slower. Pretty cool. So the point that I'm making is that a gigabit service now is very, very common. It is also cheap. Can you believe it? $80 a month for a gigabit service with Shaw cable services. That's $50 US or even less. Unbelievable. So yes, I do have 1,000 megabits download at my house, and I've been using that now for the past 6 months. Pretty cool. So yes, the internet is getting faster. Starlink is broadcasting across most of the United States now. We're seeing speeds of an average download with Starlink at around 300 megabits per second. This is quite fast and comparable to 5G. The fixed-base 5G is now available in most major centers across the United States. I've talked about this in the past year and would really encourage you to have a look at your internet service provider as things are changing very quickly. The average speed of a fixed-base 5G network is around 300 megabits, about the same as Starlink. But we're going to see as these networks mature over this year, we'll soon see that the fixed-base 5G will quickly become a gigabit service. Now, for those of you who are lucky enough to be close to the very fast 5G, the millimeter wave, you'll see potential 5,000 or 5 gigabyte download in those areas. Pretty darn fast. But hold on now. China is already rolling out its 6G networks, and it looks as though they're going to be up to 200 gigabit download. This is made by Huawei in China. So the internet is going to get very fast, very quick. Hold on, put your seatbelt on. Now, most of you connect your computers and devices through Wi-Fi in your home. We've talked about Wi-Fi congestion in the past, and certainly it is a problem as these speeds increase. You've already heard and we've talked about Wi-Fi 6, but my feeling is that as this internet increases in speed, we're going to need Wi-Fi 7, Wi-Fi 8, Wi-Fi 9, and it's never going to catch up. We also have problems with network congestion in condos, apartments, places where there's an overload of Wi-Fi signal. So for this reason, I've always recommended that you plug your computer into your router with a cable. Cable is so important. We've talked about that before. One of the biggest mistakes I see people making is when I visit them and to do tech work, I see that they have their modem and router sitting right by their computer, 2 feet away, and they're using Wi-Fi. Bad idea. Pull out your cable and just connect it. It will always work faster. And this is going to be very important as we move ahead with these extremely fast internet connections. Well, behind me are Cat5 Ethernet cables. And you're going to say, whoa, Ron, what's all that terminology? Well, Ethernet simply means network. So a cable that's going to connect to your network is called an Ethernet cable. Now, these cables have different categories, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But just to let you know, you probably are looking at the RJ45 plug, which is sitting up on my left shoulder here. The RJ45 plug, along with Cat5 cables, have been around for 40 years. Yes, the RJ45 connector was designed in 1980. Yikes. So the good news, you all have these cables sitting around your house. And when I say you should plug in your computer to your router with a Ethernet cable, you say, yeah, I've got one of those. And in fact, when I retired a long time ago, I had about 10 boxes of Ethernet cables in my house here. I finally sent them all to recycling. Now, if you look over on the right side, you're going to see some Ethernet cables I have. The bottom one is an old Ethernet cable, which I am embarrassed to say was in my studio here. And that is the reason I'm making this video, because that was connecting part of my very fast network. The ones on top you'll see, they're colored, and they are actually Cat6 cables. So what does all this mean, and why did I make this video, and what pointers can I give you? Well, let's look at that. Yes, the cables have categories, and we're going to talk about Cat5 cabling. We're going to talk about Cat5e, and really that's the only two things you'll need to know. There will be Cat6, Cat7, and Cat8. So let me explain the categories on this, okay? All right, here are the two things that you need to know. Remember, I told you there were just two things that you need to know in this video. The Cat5 cabling, and the category is written on the side of the cable, so you can look at the side and read the category of the cable. Cat5 cabling hasn't been sold for many, many, many years now. And however, you probably have those cables sitting around your house and are using them. The old Cat5 cabling had a rating of 100 megabit per second and a run of about 330 feet at about 100 megahertz. So what does all that mean? Well, it means that if you're running a network and the speed that the data is going to go through the cable on a Cat5 cable is around 100 megabits. That was fine many years ago when we had very slow internet, when we're talking about 2, 5, 10, 20 megabit per second. But as I've said earlier in this video, we're now looking at extremely fast speeds. So those Cat5 cables won't carry the signal. Particularly if you're now on fixed base 5G or Starlink, you don't want to be using your old Cat5 cabling. If you've bought a Cat5 cable in the last, let's say 10 years, you would not have bought the old Cat5. You would have bought the Cat5e, which is in the enhanced. And the Cat5e is 1,000 megabits, or it's a gigabit cable, which is good. And again, the distance it can go is around 330 feet with the same bandwidth of about 1,000 gigahertz. So that is what you need to know. You want to make sure if you're using a fast network that you're not using the old Cat5 cable. But you really should look at getting Cat6, and we're going to talk about that next. All right, here are the specifications for Cat6 cabling. If you look at the diagram, you'll see that it carries the speed at 10 gigabits per second, well within any of the internet providers' signal at present. It goes for about 180 feet, but more importantly, the bandwidth that will carry is 250 megahertz, or 2.5 times what a Cat5 cable is going to carry. It can carry that much more data. Now the Cat6A cables, again, 10 gigabytes, which is the same, they can go for a longer cable run, and you can get up to 330 feet on a 6A cable. Again, it's still 250 megahertz. Now the cost of these is really cheap and no different than Cat5, so we're now at a stage that everyone should be using Cat6 cabling. I don't know why it's so expensive at Best Buy. I tried to buy some the other day, but it is very cheap on Amazon. I bought five cable, five 5-foot sections of cable of Cat6 cabling. It came with the ends and color coded and everything on them, as you saw in the diagram, and it was $18 Canadian, which would be probably $13 or $14 US. So it is just as cheap, if not cheaper, than Cat5 cabling. So that is what you should be using. Now I wanted to just remind you, if you sold your home and you moved into a condo or an apartment that was maybe 25 or 30 years old, you then arrived and said, that's great, it's got cabling in the walls, just what Ron asked for. We won't use Wi-Fi. It's going to be a very congested area because it's a big apartment building, and we know there's a lot of congestion, Wi-Fi congestion. It's got cabling and we can plug it in. Well, just remember, the cabling in the walls is most likely going to be the old Cat5 cabling. And if you've connected to 5G fixed base and you've got a really fast connection for your apartment, it's not going to work. Conversely, you should make sure that if you are building an extension on your house, you're putting a room on, you're adding some cable in, which you should add the cable, please make sure you at least consider Cat6 wiring. You don't want to be putting wiring back in the walls that will limit the functionality of your internet speed. Well, the Cat7 cable transmits data at the same as the Cat6, but the amount of data is 600 megahertz, which is 3 times as much data that it will carry. I think if you're planning an expansion in your house and you're looking towards putting new cabling in, Cat7 isn't that much more money. I think this is certainly well worthwhile and something you should consider. Now there is a Cat8. Yes, there is a Cat8, which of course transmits at 40 gigabits, but has a 2000 megahertz bandwidth that's going to transfer data at. And of course, I had to buy one of those cables. They're about 3 times the cost of a Cat6 cable, and you'll see it on the left-hand side of your screen. It's a little bit thicker. It still has the RJ45 connector. Why did I buy that? Well, because I co-host a show called Tech for Senior, and my two co-hosts, Bob and Huey, don't have a Category 8 cable. So I wanted bragging rights, and I can say now that I have Category 8 cabling in my house. It's Ron Brown. I hope you've had as much fun watching this video as I had making it. Remember, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon for the next video. Bye now.